In early June 1942, before the sun rose over the vast blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean, the fate of nations was already being wagered by men who believed history itself was on their side. A powerful armada moved eastward through open water toward a small coral atoll called Midway, and within the command rooms of Imperial Japan, there was confidence bordering on certainty. The war that had begun with thunder at Pearl Harbor seemed to be unfolding exactly as planned. A group of soldiers, sailors, and aviators carried the weight of an empire that had not known defeat at sea for generations. The Japanese Navy, disciplined and battle-hardened, believed it was about to deliver the final decisive blow that would break American resolve and force the United States into negotiation. This belief did not emerge overnight. It was the product of 6 months of stunning victories that had reshaped the Pacific War and altered the balance of power across Asia. Since December 1941, Japanese forces had swept through Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies with breathtaking speed. The American Pacific Fleet had been badly damaged. British imperial prestige had collapsed in Asia. To Japanese planners, these successes were proof that their strategy was flawless and that their enemy was already psychologically defeated. Before the United States could recover, one final shock was needed. Midway, a tiny island but a vital American outpost, was chosen as the bait. As America joined the war in full force after Pearl Harbor, Japanese naval leadership assumed that the shock had shattered American morale. Intelligence reports and internal assessments suggested that the American public was divided and unwilling to endure a long and costly conflict. The Japanese Combined Fleet, commanded by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, assembled one of the largest naval forces ever sent into battle. It included battleships that symbolized imperial power, cruisers and destroyers bristling with weapons, submarines spread across thousands of miles of ocean, and most importantly a carrier strike force that had already proven itself deadly. Japanese aircraft carriers had dominated the skies from Hawaii to the Indian Ocean. Their aviators were the most experienced in the world, veterans of years of combat in China and the opening campaigns of the Pacific War. Many Japanese pilots believed they were invincible. They had trained under brutal standards that eliminated the weak and elevated the elite. Every successful mission reinforced the belief that skill and spirit would always triumph over numbers. In Tokyo, naval planners and political leaders shared a sense of destiny. They believed that history favored boldness and that Japan had seized the initiative at precisely the right moment. The strategy behind the Midway operation was complex but rooted in supreme confidence. By attacking Midway, Japan would force the remaining American aircraft carriers into battle. Once revealed, those carriers would be destroyed by superior Japanese air power. Without carriers, the United States would be unable to threaten Japan's expanded defensive perimeter. The Pacific would become a Japanese-controlled ocean, securing vital resources and buying time for Japan to consolidate its empire. The belief was not merely strategic but cultural. Many within Japan's leadership viewed the conflict through the lens of past wars, particularly the victory over Russia in 1905, when a decisive naval battle had shocked the world and forced a great power to the negotiating table. Midway was expected to be another such moment. American industrial capacity, though acknowledged on paper, was discounted in practice. Japanese leaders believed that factories and machines could not compensate for a lack of will. The early successes of Japanese naval aviation seemed to confirm this view. Before the United States could fully mobilize its wartime economy, Japan intended to end the war on favorable terms. There was also a dangerous assumption that the enemy would behave predictably. Japanese planners believed American commanders would rush to defend Midway without full knowledge of the trap awaiting them. They assumed that surprise belonged to Japan, just as it had at Pearl Harbor. What they did not fully grasp was that the conditions of war had already begun to change. Signals intelligence, code breaking, and industrial mobilization were quietly reshaping the battlefield. Yet in early June 1942, aboard flagships and in briefing rooms, confidence ruled the day. Maps were studied, timetables refined, and orders issued with calm assurance. The storm was coming, but Imperial Japan believed it would emerge victorious, unaware that its certainty itself had become its greatest vulnerability. In the days leading up to the Battle of Midway in early June 1942, beneath the confidence of Imperial Japan lay a dangerous illusion that shaped every major decision. This illusion was not simply about ships and aircraft. It was about people, culture, and a profound misunderstanding of the enemy. Japanese military and political leaders believed they understood the United States, but what they truly held was a distorted image formed by propaganda, selective intelligence, and cultural bias. This misperception would prove just as lethal as any American bomb. Within Japan's high command, the United States was often portrayed as a nation weakened by democracy. Open debate, political division, and a consumer-driven society were interpreted as signs of softness. Many Japanese officers believed that Americans lacked discipline and endurance. They assumed that the average American citizen, accustomed to comfort and abundance, would not tolerate prolonged sacrifice. The early months of the Pacific War seemed to validate these beliefs. The destruction at Pearl Harbor, the fall of the Philippines, and the loss of Singapore created an image of unstoppable Japanese momentum. Japanese newspapers and radio broadcasts reinforced this narrative daily. Victory was portrayed as inevitable, and the enemy as already psychologically broken. Intelligence assessments further fueled this confidence. Japanese naval intelligence underestimated the speed and scale of American industrial mobilization. Reports often focused on immediate American losses while downplaying production capacity. The vast shipyards, aircraft factories, and logistical networks of the United States were acknowledged, but not truly comprehended. Japanese planners believed that even if America could build ships quickly, it would take years to train skilled crews and pilots. They assumed quality would always outweigh quantity. This belief was deeply rooted in Japanese military culture, which emphasized elite training and spiritual strength over material advantage. Cultural misunderstanding played a central role in shaping these assumptions. Many Japanese leaders viewed war through a lens of honor and decisive battle. They believed wars were won by breaking the enemy's will in a single dramatic confrontation. The idea that a nation could absorb early defeats and grow stronger through mobilization was alien to this worldview. American democracy, with its elections and public debate, was seen as inherently fragile under pressure. Few in Tokyo imagined that an attack like Pearl Harbor would unify the American public rather than divide it, yet this is exactly what happened. The United States entered the war with a surge of national resolve that Japanese intelligence failed to measure. There was also a profound misreading of American industry as merely commercial rather than strategic. Japanese leaders often described American society as obsessed with profit and luxury. They believed factories built for consumer goods could not be rapidly converted for war production. This assumption ignored the flexibility of American manufacturing and the government's ability to coordinate industry on a massive scale. By mid-1942, American shipyards were launching new vessels at unprecedented rates, and aircraft production was accelerating rapidly. These developments were either underestimated or dismissed as exaggerated. The illusion extended to military leadership. Japanese commanders believed American officers lacked creativity and would follow predictable patterns. They assumed that American forces would react defensively and cautiously. This belief influenced the Midway Plan, which relied on luring American carriers into a carefully staged trap. The possibility that the Americans might possess foreknowledge of Japanese intentions was largely dismissed. The idea that American code breakers could penetrate Japanese naval communications was considered unlikely, even insulting. This arrogance blinded planners to warning signs that surprise was slipping away. Within the Japanese political system, dissenting views were rare and often suppressed. The culture of consensus and respect for hierarchy discouraged open criticism of prevailing assumptions. Officers who questioned optimistic assessments risked isolation or career damage. As a result, flawed ideas hardened into accepted truth. By the time the Midway operation was launched, these beliefs were no longer debated. They were treated as facts. The dangerous illusion was complete. Imperial Japan entered one of the most important battles of the Second World War believing it understood its enemy completely. In reality, it was fighting a nation it barely recognized. This gap between perception and reality would soon collide with American intelligence, industrial power, and national resolve in a way that would permanently alter the course of the Pacific War. In early June 1942, as the great fleets converged on Midway, there was one man at the center of Japan's naval war effort who understood that confidence could be dangerous. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, was both the architect of Japan's early victories and a quiet skeptic of their long-term meaning. While many of his peers saw the Pacific War as a sequence of decisive blows leading to negotiation, Yamamoto saw a far more uncertain and dangerous future. His perspective was shaped not only by strategy, but by personal experience that set him apart from almost every other senior Japanese leader. Years before the war, Yamamoto had lived and studied in the United States. He attended Harvard University, traveled widely, and later served as a naval attaché in Washington. During this time, he observed American society firsthand. He saw the scale of American cities, the vastness of its economy, and the energy of its people. Yamamoto understood that beneath the surface of consumer culture lay an extraordinary capacity for organization and production. He famously warned Japan's political leadership that he could run wild for 6 months to a year, but after that he had no confidence in victory. This was not modesty, it was realism. Yamamoto recognized that if the war became prolonged, the industrial strength of the United States would overwhelm Japan. Despite his doubts, Yamamoto was no opponent of bold action. He believed that if war was unavoidable, Japan had to strike hard and early. This belief led him to support the attack on Pearl Harbor, not because he thought it would win the war outright, but because he believed it was the only way to buy time. The destruction of the American Pacific Fleet would delay retaliation and create an opportunity for Japan to secure its defensive perimeter. Yamamoto never believed Pearl Harbor would force America to surrender. He believed it would awaken a sleeping giant, but hoped that Japan could fortify its gains before that giant fully rose. This tension defined Yamamoto's role leading up to Midway. He was responsible for planning an ambitious operation that reflected the optimism of Japan's naval leadership, yet privately he understood its risks. Yamamoto believed that destroying the remaining American aircraft carriers was essential. Without doing so, Japan's early victories would slowly erode under the weight of American production. The Midway operation was his attempt to force a decisive engagement before the balance of power shifted irreversibly. However, even Yamamoto was constrained by the system he served. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized complexity and deception, resulting in a plan that spread forces across vast distances. Yamamoto believed surprise would compensate for dispersion, but he also knew that if surprise failed, coordination would be difficult. His command style relied on highly trained subordinates executing precise orders, yet war rarely unfolded with such precision. Yamamoto's understanding of America also placed him at odds with the cultural assumptions of his peers. While others dismissed American democracy as weak, Yamamoto saw it as a source of resilience. He had witnessed how public opinion could be mobilized when challenged. He understood that American industry could transform rapidly under government direction. These insights made him uneasy as the war progressed. Each Japanese victory increased public confidence at home, but Yamamoto feared that success was masking deeper vulnerabilities. The loss of experienced pilots could not be easily replaced. Japan's industrial base, though efficient, lacked the capacity for sustained attrition warfare. Yamamoto worried that Japan was gambling its future on the assumption of quick victory. As the fleet sailed toward Midway, Yamamoto remained hundreds of miles away aboard his flagship, overseeing a battle plan that he hoped would succeed but feared might fail. He trusted his aviators and believed in their skill, yet he also knew that the enemy they faced was not the one many in Tokyo imagined. The United States he had known was adaptable, determined, and vast beyond easy comprehension. Yamamoto stood as a tragic figure, a commander who understood the storm he was unleashing but lacked the power to change its course. In early June 1942, as dawn broke over the Pacific skies near a remote coral outpost, the dangerous illusions and warnings of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto collided with reality. The Battle of Midway began not with thunderous gunfire, but with aircraft engines humming into the morning air. What followed over the next few hours would become one of the most decisive turning points of the Second World War, a moment when misjudging an enemy reshaped history. Japanese aircraft carriers launched their first strike against Midway Island, confident in their plan and unaware that the United States Navy was already waiting. American code breakers had penetrated Japanese naval communications, uncovering the target and timing of the attack. This intelligence advantage, combined with rapid decision-making, allowed American forces to position their remaining carriers northeast of Midway, hidden beyond the horizon. The element of surprise, long believed to belong to Japan, had quietly shifted. As Japanese planes struck Midway's defenses, inflicting damage but failing to neutralize the airfield, a critical decision confronted Japanese commanders. Believing American carriers were still distant, they began rearming their aircraft for a second strike. Bombs were swapped for torpedoes, fuel lines were opened, and flight decks became crowded with armed and vulnerable planes. It was a moment of fatal exposure. At nearly the same time, American carrier aircraft launched wave after wave toward the Japanese fleet. Many of these early attacks were uncoordinated and costly. American torpedo squadrons, flying low and slow, were decimated by Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Their sacrifice, however, achieved something vital. Japanese combat air patrols were drawn down to sea level, leaving the skies above dangerously thin. Then, shortly after 10 in the morning, the battle reached its climax. American dive bombers, arriving almost by chance at the perfect moment, descended from high altitude onto the Japanese carriers. Within minutes, 3 carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were engulfed in flames. Fueled aircraft and munitions turned flight decks into infernos. Later that day, a 4th carrier, Hiryu, was also destroyed. In the span of a few hours, Imperial Japan lost 4 frontline aircraft carriers and hundreds of its most experienced pilots. The losses were irreplaceable. Unlike the United States, Japan lacked the industrial capacity and training infrastructure to recover quickly. Each carrier represented years of construction and a corps of elite aviators whose skills could not be rapidly replaced. The shock rippled through the Japanese fleet. What had been envisioned as a decisive victory became a desperate retreat. For the United States, Midway was more than a tactical success. It was a strategic revelation. The battle demonstrated the power of accurate intelligence, flexible command, and industrial depth. American shipyards were already producing new carriers, aircraft, and escort vessels at a pace Japan could not match. Midway bought time, and time favored the United States. The momentum of the Pacific War shifted permanently. Japan would continue to fight fiercely, but it would never again launch a major offensive on the scale of Midway. The confidence that had defined the early war years gave way to caution and attrition. For Yamamoto, Midway confirmed his darkest fears. The prolonged war he had warned against had become inevitable. Less than a year later, he would be killed when American intelligence intercepted his flight plans, another testament to the growing reach of American code breaking. The Battle of Midway stands today as a case study in strategic misperception. It shows how cultural misunderstanding, overconfidence, and flawed assumptions can undo even the most formidable military power. It also demonstrates how national resolve, industrial strength, and intelligence can overcome early defeat. Midway did not end the Pacific War, but it ensured that its outcome would be decided not by a single dramatic blow, but by sustained effort and realistic understanding of the enemy.